Life's funny, isn't it? One minute you're on top of the world, the next, it's crumbling beneath your feet. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. This story begins in the warm glow of happiness. My name's Emily, and not too long ago, my biggest problem was deciding what to cook for dinner or what movie to watch on a lazy Sunday afternoon. James and I met in what you might call the old-fashioned way, at a mutual friend's barbecue. He was the guy flipping burgers and telling stories, making everyone laugh. I remember thinking, who is this guy? With his easy smile and a way of looking at me like I was the only one there. It didn't take long for us to become an us. "Emily, you have to try my special burger," he'd said, handing me a plate with a confidence that made me smile. "It's got a secret sauce that'll change your life." I laughed, rolling my eyes. "Change my life, huh? That's a pretty big claim for a burger." But I'll admit, it was a darn good burger. Maybe not life-changing, but it definitely made that day memorable. Not long after, James met Grandma. She was everything to me, the one who raised me when my own parents couldn't. The way he talked to her, with respect and a bit of playful banter, it won her over in a heartbeat. "I like him," she whispered to me as he went to grab us some lemonade. "He's genuine, and he's got kind eyes. You hold on to this one, Emily." And hold on, I did. We got married in a small ceremony, just family and close friends. The house I moved into was full of memories. The walls echoed with laughter from a time when my parents were still alive. James and I started filling it with new memories of our own, and it felt like life was just right. I got pregnant about a year into the marriage. When I told James, the look on his face was something I thought I'd remember forever with warmth in my heart. His joy seemed to match mine, filling up the room until it was almost bursting. "We're going to have a baby, Em," he said, lifting me up and spinning me around. "A little one of our own, can you believe it?" "I can," I whispered back, "because it's happening with you." They say bad news never has good timing. The day I lost Grandma was a cold slap of reality, a reminder that life doesn't play fair. Grandma was more than family. She was my confidant, my cheerleader, my safe place. Losing her felt like being adrift at sea without a compass. I remember sitting on the sofa, a cup of tea growing cold in my hands, numb. James came to me, his face a mask of concern. "Em, talk to me," he urged, his voice gentle. "What's there to talk about?" I muttered, staring at the tea, watching as it lost its steam, its warmth, its life, kind of like how I felt inside. "We'll get through this together. You're not alone," he said, wrapping an arm around my shoulder. But his words, meant to comfort, felt distant, like a radio playing softly in the background, familiar yet easy to tune out. Then, as if I hadn't already been robbed of enough, our baby slipped away before I ever got to hold them, to tell them how much I loved them, to promise them the world. The miscarriage was like a physical blow, one that knocked the wind out of me and left me gasping for air, for answers, for comfort that wouldn't come. James was there, yes, always there, but somehow not really. "Emily, we can try for another baby when you're ready," he said one night as we lay in the darkness, his voice void of the pain I felt. I turned to him, a part of me desperate to find the husband who had once spun me around in joy. "I don't want another baby, James. I wanted this one. Our baby." The words were a whisper, but they might as well have been screams for how they echoed in the silence. "We'll make it through this," he said. But his assurance sounded hollow, like a promise made out of obligation rather than desire. I sought refuge in solitude, in the quiet of the house filled with too many ghosts of what could have been. Days melded into nights, and I lost track of time. I lost track of myself. James tried, in his way. "Let's go out, see people. It might help," he suggested one day, his hand resting lightly on the back of the chair I was slumped in. I shook my head, my eyes fixed on a crack in the wall, a blemish I hadn't noticed before. "I can't face the world, James. Not yet. The world is where the pain is." "Emily, staying cooped up in here won't change what happened," he pressed, but I barely heard him. How could I tell him that the world outside these walls reminded me of everything I had lost? That every street corner, every shop window, every smiling face was a reminder of a happiness that felt like it had been stolen from me? The funeral was a blur. People came, they said things, they left. I nodded, I shook hands, I accepted condolences. But nothing got through. I was in a bubble, watching life happen around me, a life I no longer felt a part of. James was there, of course, but his presence felt more like a shadow than a source of warmth. "You're so strong, Emily," he told me after the service, his hand finding mine. I wanted to pull away, to scream that I wasn't strong, that I was broken. Instead, I just nodded. What was the point in correcting him? The truth seemed too heavy to share, even with him. As days turned into weeks, I felt James pulling away. Maybe he was tired of dealing with someone who seemed to have given up on life. Maybe he just didn't know how to help me. Maybe he needed an escape from the suffocating sadness that had enveloped our home. "I'm here for you, Em, but you need to start being here too," he said one evening, his patience wearing thin. "Here?" I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't even know where here is anymore, James." He sighed, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I mean, you need to start living again, for your sake and mine." I looked up at him then, really looked at him, and saw the strain in his eyes. I knew he was struggling too, in his own way, but the gulf between us had grown too wide, too deep to cross with mere words. That's when the creeping thought began to take root. Maybe I was alone in this after all. James was there, but not really. Not in the way I needed him to be. As the days rolled into weeks and then months, the chasm between James and me grew wider. The man who had once seemed like my anchor was becoming more and more like a stranger, coming home late and sometimes not at all. It gnawed at me, this feeling of him slipping away. I remember one evening, the clock ticking past midnight and the other side of the bed still cold and untouched. When he finally came through the door, I couldn't hold back anymore. "Where have you been, James? Do you know what time it is?" My voice was shaky but firm. He looked tired, his eyes avoiding mine. "Work's been a nightmare. You know how it is." His voice was flat, dismissive almost. "No, I don't know," I snapped back, "because you never talk to me about it anymore. You never talk to me about anything." He let out a long sigh and began to take off his jacket. "Em, we've been through this. Work is work. It's stressful, and I don't want to burden you with it." "But I want to share that burden, James. I thought that's what we did," I said, the last of my words trailing off into a whisper. He paused and finally sat down on the edge of the bed, looking at me. "I know, and I appreciate it, but you have enough on your plate." "Enough on my plate?" I repeated, incredulous. "You mean dealing with the loss and trying to piece myself back together? Do you think ignoring me helps with that?" "That's not what I'm doing," he protested. But even as he said it, it sounded like he didn't believe it himself. "I offered you a divorce, James," I reminded him, my voice breaking a little. "I told you that you didn't have to stay with me out of pity or obligation." He looked up sharply at that. "Is that what you think this is? Pity? Obligation?" There was a hint of the old fire in his voice, a glimmer of the man I knew. "Yes, that's what it feels like," I admitted. "You're here, but you're not with me, not really, and it hurts." He ran his hands through his hair, a sure sign he was stressed. "Em, I'm trying. I really am, but I can't just switch off from work. It's been really tough." "But it's more than work, isn't it? You're away even when you're here. You've got your phone on you all the time, always texting, always distracted." He didn't say anything to that, just stared at the floor. "Is there someone else?" The question hung in the air, heavy and frightening. "Em, don't be ridiculous," he said quickly, but his eyes told a different story. I felt a coldness spread through me. This was not the man I married, the one who would look me in the eyes and tell me the truth, no matter how hard. "I need you to be honest with me, James. Please," I implored, my hands clasping and unclasping in my lap. He was silent for a long moment, and then, "There's no one else. It's just work. You've got to believe me." I wanted to. Oh, how I wanted to believe him. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and once that happens, things can never go back to how they were. In the weeks that followed, I watched James like a detective. I noticed how his phone was always face down, how he'd step out of the room to take calls. The signs were there, and I couldn't ignore them anymore. It was a Wednesday when my world finally started to crumble. I answered a call from a number I didn't recognize. Hello? Is this Emily Stanton? The voice was male, gruff, and not one I knew. Yes, who's this? The man paused and then, We need to talk about your husband. My heart sank. What about him? I think you'd better sit down, Mrs. Stanton. The cafe was one of those nondescript places, sandwiched between a laundromat and a closed-down bookstore. It seemed like a fitting backdrop for what was to come. I sat there, stirring my coffee, each second stretching out like an eternity until the man showed up. He was a large man, with a look that didn't invite many questions. He sat across from me, his hands clasped together, a folder sitting like a barrier between us. Mrs. Stanton, I'm sorry for the mystery, but I thought it was best we talk in person, he started, his voice serious. Who are you? I asked, my voice steady despite the storm inside. He nodded as if he expected the question. My name's Mike Sanders, and I believe we have a common problem. Your husband, James. I swallowed hard. What about him? Mike opened the folder and slid a photo across the table. It was James with a woman I'd never seen before. They were laughing, close, too close. That's my wife, Mike said, tapping the picture. I felt a strange detachment looking at it. What do they have to do with each other? They work together, and they're having an affair, he said bluntly. I looked up, meeting his gaze. That's impossible. James would never... He reached back into the folder and took out a handful of printed messages, placing them in front of me. These are just from the past week. I read them, each word a tiny dagger. There were plans to meet up, pet names, and talk of the future. A future without me, without us. Why are you showing me this? I asked, my voice a ghost of itself. Because I thought you should know, and because I want to end it. I thought maybe you would want that too. I stared at the evidence, my mind racing, but my heart already knew the truth. He told me he loved me. He promised he'd never leave. People lie, Mrs. Stanton, and they're good at it, Mike said, his voice bitter. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. He was all I had. Mike leaned forward. You got a choice here. You can pretend this never happened, go on with your life. Or you can confront him, make him face what he's done. And what about you? I asked. He sighed, a heavy, weary sound. I'm going to divorce her. She can have him if she wants. I just want out. My hands were shaking as I gathered the papers, folding them with care I didn't feel. What are you going to do? Mike asked. The answer surprised even me. I'm going to fight back. Mike nodded. Good. If you need anything, evidence, support, you let me know. Thank you, I said. But as I stood up, I felt anything but thankful. My life as I knew it was over, and it was time for me to figure out what came next. That day, the sun hung low, a glaring eye that seemed to watch over the unfolding scene with indifference. I was waiting on the porch when James's car pulled up. His step was light, too light for a man coming home to a crumbling marriage. He caught the look on my face as he approached. What's with the gloom? He asked casually, as if my scowl was just another part of an ordinary day. I held up one of the photos silently. His eyes flicked to it, and his smile faltered, but only for a second. Oh, that, he chuckled. I see you've met my other woman. I felt a hollow laugh bubble up from my throat. Is that all you can say? Oh, that? He folded his arms and leaned against the porch railing. What do you want me to say? That I'm sorry? That it was a mistake? Because it wasn't. I'm not sorry, and it was no mistake. Why, James? I demanded, my hands clenching the photo so tightly the edges crumpled. He laughed, a cold, heartless sound. You were convenient, you know? A nice house, a decent bit of savings, and when your grandmother passed, well, that was just icing on the cake. I recoiled as if he'd struck me. You think my grandmother's death was a financial gain? Why else would I stick around? He shrugged. Especially after, you know. He paused, eyeing me with a cruelty I hadn't seen before. After the kid. I shook my head in disbelief. And you hoped what? That I'd off myself in grief? Would have made things simpler, he quipped. His words were like acid, burning through the last vestiges of the life I thought I knew. You're vile, I hissed. You always were too sensitive, too stupid to see what was right in front of you. He continued mercilessly. You thought I would end my life? I asked, the reality of his betrayal sinking in, a cold weight in my stomach. It would have been a win-win. You'd escape your pathetic little life, and I'd be free with a nice little nest egg. His grin was the ugliest thing I'd ever seen. I couldn't hold back the tears, but I was damned if I'd let him see them fall. And now? What's your grand plan now? Now? He laughed again, stepping closer. Now, I guess I'll have to settle for a divorce. You'll probably screw me over on that, won't you? Drag it out. Make me suffer. You don't deserve quick and easy, I managed to say, my voice surprisingly even. His expression soured. You're an ugly, stupid woman, you know that? I don't know what I was thinking, marrying you. I looked at him then, really looked at him, and I felt something shift inside me. The man I had loved was a ghost, a fiction. In his place stood a stranger with a heart full of venom. Get off my porch, James, I said quietly. He smirked, taking a step back. Gladly. This place was never really my style anyway. The courthouse was a place where I thought I'd celebrate our milestones. Instead, I walked up its steps to dissolve the very foundation of my marriage. Mike was right beside me, his presence a silent support. I had the papers in my hand, feeling the weight of every word that testified against James. Mike carried his own set of damning evidence, a mirror to my betrayal. Our steps echoed in the empty hallway, a march towards a verdict we both needed. Inside the courtroom, the air was stale, heavy with the burden of judgments past. James and his mistress, Mike's wife, were already there, a tableau of guilt. Mrs. Stanton? The clerk called out. I stepped forward, handing over the sheaf of papers that detailed every misstep of my husband's affair. The judge surveyed the room, his gaze lingering on me, then on Mike. You have evidence to present? I nodded, my throat tight. Yes, Your Honor. The evidence was laid bare for the court to see. Photographs that spoke 1,000 words of betrayal, texts and call logs that wove a narrative of deceit. I didn't look at James. I didn't need to see his face to remember his lies. And how do you plead? The judge asked, turning to James and his co-defendant. Their answers were a soft murmur of legalese. No contest. The judge took his time, reviewing the evidence, his expression unreadable. Then, finally, he spoke, his voice the gavel that shattered the last tie between James and me. In light of the uncontested evidence, I am granting the petition for divorce. The division of assets will proceed as outlined, and given the circumstances, Mr. Stanton, you will also pay restitution. James stood, his face ashen, but I felt nothing. No victory, no joy, just the hollow end of a chapter. Mike met my gaze, a silent question in his eyes. Had it been worth it? I could only nod. It wasn't about winning or losing anymore. It was about setting the record straight, about reclaiming my dignity from the ruins James had left behind. The courtroom's heavy door swung closed behind me with a sound that felt final. Mike and I found a quiet corner in the bustling hallway outside. So, it's done, Mike said, his voice a mix of relief and something else, maybe sadness. I nodded, the reality of the situation settling in. It's done. They didn't even put up a fight, did they? No, he sighed, looking down at the floor. They knew there was no point. I thought about James, about the love I thought we shared, and how it had all been a lie. Do you think they're sorry for what they did, or just sorry they got caught? Mike's gaze met mine, steady and sure. Does it matter? They're out of our lives now. That's what counts. I let out a long breath, one I'd been holding since the day I got that call. I guess you're right. I didn't want it to end this way. Nobody ever does, he said. But you stood up for yourself. That counts for a lot. The weight of the papers in my bag seemed lighter now. Justice, or something like it, had been served. It didn't undo the past, but it cleared the path for the future. I just want to move on, I admitted. And you will, Mike assured me. This is a fresh start for both of us. I managed a small smile. A fresh start, I echoed. We walked to the exit, the light from the doors growing brighter as we approached. Outside, the sun was shining, and the world moved on, indifferent to the small dramas unfolding in its midst. Emily, Mike said as we stepped into the daylight, what will you do first? I thought for a moment. I'm going to go home, take a long bath, and then I'm going to start planning my future, one step at a time. That sounds perfect, he said. And if you ever need a friend, you know where to find me. I looked at him, grateful for his unexpected friendship. Thank you, Mike, for everything. The days following the divorce were quiet. One afternoon, as I was sorting through some of Grandma's old things, the doorbell rang. I hesitated for a moment, half expecting the past to be on my doorstep, but it was just Sarah, my neighbor. Hey, Emily, she greeted me with a warm, if somewhat pitying smile. I heard about everything. I'm so sorry. I brought you some casserole. I figured you might not feel like cooking. I managed a small laugh. You figured right. Thanks, Sarah. We settled in the kitchen, the casserole warming in the oven, filling the room with a homely scent. So, what will you do now? Sarah asked, sipping on the tea I'd made for us. I'm not sure, I admitted, but I'm thinking of selling the house. There are too many memories here. I need a fresh start. That sounds like a good idea, she said. A new place, new memories. Yeah, I mused, gazing out of the kitchen window. I want to travel too, see the places Grandma and I always talked about. That's wonderful, Emily. It's what you deserve, Sarah encouraged. I smiled, feeling a flicker of excitement at the thought. It is, isn't it? I spent so long living for someone else, trying to be what James wanted. It's time I lived for myself. Sarah reached across the table, giving my hand a reassuring squeeze. You've got this. And who knows, maybe along the way, you'll find someone who loves you for you. I hope so. But for now, I'm okay with being by myself, I said, feeling a strength within me that I hadn't felt in years. You're stronger than you know, Emily. And this fresh start is just the beginning for you, Sarah said with a knowing nod. The timer on the oven dinged then, breaking our conversation. As I stood to get the casserole out, I felt a sense of closure. The chapter with James was over, but my story was far from finished. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought of Grandma, of her strength and her love. She had wanted me to be happy, to be cared for. In the end, I realized the person who needed to care for me the most was myself. And with that realization, I knew that no matter where I went or what I did, I would be okay.
All right, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. "Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize." Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. "What kind of training are you giving your subordinates?" Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed, I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." "Mike, what have you done?" Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part." I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.